On the discreet street of Mayfair, between an antique shop with clouded panes and a tea-house forever scented with bergamot, stood a blue wooden door, simple, almost invisible to the eyes of passers-by. For those who dared cross it, a small parlour would be revealed, modest in appearance, yet steeped in a quiet life. Piles of fabric rested on tall shelves, coloured threads gleamed like slivers of sunlight, and the air carried the constant fragrance of melted wax and freshly cut cloth. Here lived and worked Clara Weston, 25 years of age. With no dowry, no fortune, and no prospect of marriage, she had learned to support herself with what she had inherited from her mother, hands steady, creative, and tireless. Needle in hand, Clara shaped dreams, though never her own. Each gown she sewed was destined for the young debutantes of high society, who flocked to her in groups, brimming with demands and stifled giggles behind their fans. They dressed in silk, in satin, in organza, and with every fitting they never missed the chance to remind her of the unbridgeable distance that lay between them. "If only you had somewhere to wear them, Miss Weston," one would remark, malice thinly veiled. The others would laugh in chorus before turning back to the mirror and twirling before it like satisfied peacocks. Clara, however, smiled as well, a delicate, practiced smile that concealed the pangs striking through her heart. She knew her role was to serve, not to answer, to stitch the brilliance that would never belong to her. When the last group departed, the parlour seemed to sigh with her. The laughter of the young ladies lingered on the walls like a ghost. Then there remained only the patient sound of the scissors cutting through the cloth as if cutting through fate itself. That night she worked upon a lilac gown, delicate and weightless, adorning it with tiny pearls. She lifted her gaze to the window and saw Mayfair's street alive, carriages clattering over cobblestones, gentlemen hurrying past, ladies wrapped in pale shawls, all heading toward a luminous life in which she would never partake. She sighed softly, returning to her embroidery. "Each stitch a step I shall never take," she murmured to herself, a confession lost to silence. And so went the existence of Clara Weston, a stage made of threads and lace, at once her refuge and her prison. The following afternoon, a fine rain descended over Mayfair, turning the cobblestones into ashen mirrors. Clara, tucked away in her little shop, was adjusting a roll of blue ribbon when the bell rang, soft yet insistent. Upon opening the door, she found herself face to face with a young lady of delicate features and well-mannered bearing. There was in her eyes an almost innocent anxiety. Behind her stood a tall man, his austere countenance fixed attentively upon the seamstress. Threads of silver in his dark hair revealed not only his age, but also the gravity of a life marked by seriousness. "Good afternoon, Miss Weston," said the young lady with a timid smile. "I am Emily Ashford, and this is my father." The diplomat, Sir Henry Ashford, widowed for several years, inclined his head in greeting. His presence carried a solemnity that seemed to fill the modest room, even though his words, when spoken, were always measured. With her usual composure, Clara invited them in. As she helped Emily remove her rain-dampened coat, she could not help but notice how the father's eyes lingered on every detail: the shelves lined with fabric, the hand-drawn sketches, the small vase of modest flowers upon the window ledge. Emily spoke with youthful enthusiasm, describing the gown she desired for her debut, sky blue, as light as a cloud, yet adorned with discreet embroidery. Clara listened attentively, offering suggestions, measuring with her soft tape the bust, the waist, the length. Every gesture was accompanied by Henry's silent observation, as though he weighed not only the seamstress's words, but also the manner in which she treated his daughter, with patience, delicacy, and never a trace of condescension. At one point, Clara, leaning over her sketchbook, lifted her eyes and met his. For a fleeting instant, the room seemed to contract. The sound of the rain outside faded into nothing. There was in his gaze something more than professional curiosity. It was as if he perceived beyond the modest figure of the seamstress, the woman she struggled to keep hidden. Flustered, Clara lowered the gaze, turning once more to Emily. "You shall have the perfect gown for your debut, Miss Ashford. I can promise you that." Emily smiled with gratitude. Henry remained silent, yet an almost imperceptible trace of a smile touched his austere expression. When they departed, Clara accompanied them to the door. The rain still fell gently, and the wheels of the carriage splashed as it rolled away. Clara stood in the doorway, her hands resting upon her apron. She could not explain why her heart beat so quickly. It was only a client, she told herself, and yet the memory of that gaze lingered in her mind like an invisible thread, pulling her toward a destiny she dared not imagine. The following morning, the little Mayfair shop once again filled with feminine voices. 3 young debutantes swept into the space as though invading lesser ground, bringing with them the exaggerated perfume of artificial flowers and the laughter of those who had never known restraint. Clara received them with her usual composure, though she already guessed what would come. They scattered through the room, handling fabrics with careless fingers, demanding impossible colors, criticizing cuts they scarcely understood. "I want something that will shine brighter than all the others tonight," declared one, holding a length of golden satin against the light from the window. "And bolder than Miss Brown's, of course," added another, provoking conspiratorial laughter. As Clara noted down their measurements and requests, she heard, as so often, the remark that pierced like a dagger. "How curious, is it not? She sews gowns for the ballrooms, yet will never have occasion to wear one herself. It must be torment to live surrounded by dreams that do not belong to her." Their laughter rang out. Clara maintained her delicate smile, pretending not to be shaken, though her fingers trembled slightly as they held the measuring tape. She had learned to endure in silence, for any reaction would be deemed insolence. At that moment, the bells sounded again. The room fell silent, and all turned toward the door. Clara opened it, and, to the debutante's surprise, there once more stood Sir Henry Ashford, accompanied by his daughter Emily. The diplomat entered with Fran's step, his coat immaculate despite the rain still threatening outside. His eyes, when they met Clara's, softened for the briefest instant. The young ladies, perceiving his presence, immediately adjusted into artificial postures, eager to be noticed. But Henry, offering them no more than a brief nod, turned instead to the seamstress. "We have come to confirm a few details regarding my daughter's gown," he said, his voice grave yet courteous. While Clara assisted Emily in draping the sky-blue fabric that would become her debut attire, Henry stood quietly, observing. It was then he overheard, scarcely more than a whisper, the mockery of one of the debutantes. "Just imagine, the poor seamstress surrounded by such splendor and never invited anywhere." Henry lifted his gaze, and his expression hardened at once. The young ladies paled beneath the weight of his stern eyes. He spoke not a word,
A diplomat knew that silence, when charged with authority, could weigh heavier than any rebuke. Clara, however, had noticed. When she raised her eyes to Henry, she found in him a severity not directed at her, but at the cruel tongues that had sought to wound her. A faint blush rose to her cheeks. Later, as he departed with Emily, Henry remarked softly, only for his daughter to hear, "Curious, Emily, at times those with fewer titles bear greater dignity." Left alone once again, Clara sank into her chair. Her heart still beat rapidly, not from the insults she knew so well, but from the glance that morning had defended her without a single word.
Night fell over Mayfair wrapped in a soft mist, veiling the windows of Clara's small salon like a shroud of mystery. Inside, only a single candle burned upon the wooden table, casting long shadows across walls lined with fabric. Clara remained awake, bent over a sky-blue satin gown that promised to transform Emily Ashford into the star of her debut night. Her fingers, marked with the pricks of countless needles, moved with tireless precision, embroidering delicate silver thread roses along the skirt. It was patient, almost sacred work. And yet, with every stitch, Clara felt as though she was sewing not only another's destiny, but her own. A destiny of renunciation. Outside, the distant sound of a carriage crossed the street, reminding her of the ballroom soon to be alight with music, laughter, and dance. How many times had she imagined herself, if only for an instant, within one of them? Dressed in silk, spinning beneath crystal chandeliers, feeling the weight of someone's gaze fixed upon her. Clara lifted her eyes to the mirror in the corner. Reflected there was herself, hair pinned in simple fashion, skin grown pale with fatigue, apron stained with threads of color. She smiled with melancholy. This was not how a lady should appear, and thus she would never be invited to. Yet even so, that image did not deter her. With every stitch, every embroidered petal, there lingered a secret flicker of dream. Perhaps, just perhaps, there might be a place in the world where she could be seen not as a seamstress, but as a woman. And, against her will, the thought returned. The gaze of Sir Henry Ashford fixed upon her, serious, intent. Not a gaze of mockery or condescension, but of recognition. Clara felt her heart quicken, and swiftly reproached herself in silence. "A foolish fancy, nothing more," she murmured, returning to her needle. The candle's flame wavered, and the embroidery shimmered beneath its trembling light. Clara sighed, feeling the weight of her solitude, and in that narrow room, with only the rhythmic sound of thread passing through cloth, she drifted to sleep upon the unfinished gown, dreaming of a world she had never believed could belong to her.
The following days brought more visits from the Ashford family. Emily, radiant with the nearness of her debut, came to try on her gown almost daily, always accompanied by her father. Clara, focused on her work, strove to maintain composure, yet she could not ignore the way Sir Henry observed not merely the garments, but also the delicate gestures with which she adjusted a hem, the care with which she tied a bow, the patience in every word she spoke to his daughter. One afternoon, upon noticing the redness in Clara's fingers, worn raw by the needle, Henry approached without ceremony. He took her hand before she could withdraw. "You bleed to create beautiful things for others. he said in a deep voice, almost like an accusation. Clara, startled, lifted her eyes to his. She felt warmth rise to her cheeks, and, embarrassed, gently slipped her hand free. "It is only my trade, sir, nothing more." A silence lingered between them, heavy, broken only by the clatter of the measuring tape Emily had let fall to the floor. Henry's gaze, steady, yet not intrusive, seemed to wish to say more than propriety would allow. Clara, however, hastened back to her work, seeking in the embroidery an anchor against the strange unease that overtook her. In the days that followed, Henry always found some excuse to accompany Emily. He asked questions about fabrics, cuts, foreign fashions, but there was something in his eyes that betrayed a deeper interest. Once, seeing Clara intent on fastening a brooch at his daughter's waist, he let slip in a low voice, "There is a soul in your gowns that I find in no other, perhaps because you put into them more than thread and fabric alone." Clara held her breath, not daring to reply. She merely inclined her head in respectful acknowledgment, though her heart beat unevenly within her chest. That night, alone in the salon, she recalled his words, "more than thread and fabric." She felt foolish for keeping them as though they were a treasure, yet she could not help herself. For the first time in many years, Clara Weston began to realize that, perhaps, at last, someone was truly seeing her. At last the long-awaited evening arrived. The Ashford residence shone like a beacon in the heart of London. Crystal chandeliers spilled golden light across the walls, while carriages lined the gates, delivering ladies resplendent in silks and gentlemen in impeccable attire. In the great hall, Emily Ashford descended the staircase with a hesitant smile, yet dressed in splendor. The sky-blue gown, born of Clara's hands, seemed to capture the very light of the night. Its skirt flowed like gentle waves, embroidered with silver blossoms that shimmered at every step. The guests turned their heads, whispering praises. Some even sighed, moved not only by the young woman's beauty, but by the perfect harmony of her attire. It was as though the gown had been crafted to magnify her youth and sweetness. Henry, standing at the foot of the staircase, watched his daughter with serene pride. Leaning toward a fellow diplomat, he murmured softly, "It is not the fabric alone that enchants, but the soul of the one who stitched it." Meanwhile, in the little salon in Mayfair, Clara remained alone. The flame of a single candle flickered over her table, casting its light upon the pile of fabrics awaiting their turn. From the tall windows came only the faint echo of music, violins and measured steps, drifting like the memory of a world to which she did not belong. She sat upon her chair, gazing at the unfinished lilac gown. Her hands rested idle in her lap. Her heart, however, throbbed with that familiar ache, the certainty that she created beauty for all, save herself. For an instant she dared to picture herself there, among chandeliers and dancers, clad in pale silk, spinning beneath the gaze of someone who might truly see her. But she quickly quelled the dream. Reality was merciless. Clara Weston was nothing more than a seamstress. And yet, when she closed her eyes, she saw again Henry's grave countenance, not as the esteemed diplomat, but as a man who, in silence, seemed to perceive the hidden wound within her soul. And so the night unfolded in a weave of sorrow and hope.
divided between two worlds, Emily's splendor in the ballroom and Clara's solitude in her modest atelier. A few days after the ball, Clara received an unexpected visit. Emily stepped into the little salon carrying a bouquet of freshly gathered flowers, their fragrance a gentle blend of lilac and jasmine. Clara's heart quickened, startled and curious. "Miss Weston," Emily said, her eyes alight with excitement, "Father wishes you to come to our garden tomorrow. He says that creators deserve to see their work in bloom." Clara hesitated. An invitation from the Ashford world was, for her, nearly unimaginable. Yet the delicate insistence of the young lady made her accept, as though an invisible hand were leading her towards something she had until then only dared to dream in secret. The following morning, the garden was alive with spring's abundance. White and pink roses, cascades of wisteria, and a sweetness in the air that spoke of promise and lightness. Clara, her heart racing, walked across the dew-damp grass, striving to maintain her composure. Henry awaited her near a small wrought-iron bench. As she approached, a faint smile softened his usually grave features. "Miss Weston," he said, with a courtesy almost formal, "I have been waiting to thank you personally for what you have done for my daughter. Your work is more than a gown. In it, there is care, devotion, a soul, something rare to be found these days." Clara lowered her eyes, surprised by the warmth contained in those words. For the first time, she felt that she was not merely an executor of orders, not an anonymous seamstress. She was seen, truly seen. Henry went on, his voice gentler now, almost confiding. "Never underestimate the worth of one who creates beauty, even when it seems they reap nothing in return. Sometimes it only takes an attentive gaze for all effort to be recognized." Clara's heart leapt. For a moment, it seemed the flowers in the garden leaned toward her as though in approval of that meeting. A sensation of pride, shyness, and hope mingled within her soul. For the first time she thought, "Perhaps, after all, there is a world for me beyond this little salon." And that morning, beneath the gentle light of May and the perfume of blossoms, Clara Weston tasted the sweetness of recognition, the first thread binding her to something greater than the solitude that had defined her until then. In the days following the invitation to the garden, Clara's reputation began to draw attention, not all of it favorable. Rumors spread quietly, like sparks flickering from an old fireplace. Imagine that! The poor seamstress of Mayfair thinking she could have any prominence among the elite. Sir Henry Ashford? What interest could he possibly have in a mere seamstress? The words reached Clara's ears through visits to shops, whispered gossip from clients, and the malicious murmurs of the young debutantes who still frequented her salon. Her chest tightened with a familiar ache of invisibility and disdain. Determined, she resolved to avoid the Ashford residence. She ignored Emily's notes and kept herself locked in her small atelier, focusing only on the dresses that needed finishing. Yet, paradoxically, the silence became even heavier. It was Henry who appeared. Without announcement, he entered the salon, his steps firm and his gaze serene, the kind of composure only a man accustomed to diplomacy could maintain. He found Clara bent over an unfinished gown, the afternoon light illuminating her dark brown hair, weary from hours of labor. "Why do you keep your distance?" he asked, his voice deep, but without accusation. Clara raised her eyes, pain and stubbornness locked in her expression. "Because I do not belong to your world, sir. I only clothe it." Henry stepped closer, carefully moving around the table so as not to break the heavy silence of the room. "Clara, he have lost a wife whom the world deemed perfect, yet none of them saw my daughter, nor me, as you do. She felt the impact of his words. It was as though the outside world, with all its cruelty, held no power within that room. Henry took her hand, firm yet unhurried, conveying trust and recognition. "I do not see a seamstress. I see the woman I wish to walk beside." The tears she had held back until then came without warning. Clara lowered her head, unable to respond immediately. Silence reigned, filled only by the whisper of the wind through the curtains. In that moment, the seamstress who had always felt invisible realized something unexpected. There was finally someone who truly saw her, someone willing to look beyond rumor, malice, and society itself to recognize her essence. And it was in that silence, heavy with emotion, that Clara Weston began to understand. The world may mock, but love, when true, bends for no one's criticism. Winter was beginning to make its presence felt in Mayfair, with shorter afternoons, and the air tinged with a gentle chill. In the small salon, Clara carefully folded a gown still unfinished, the silence broken only by the occasional crackle of the fireplace. Suddenly, the door opened. It was Henry, hat in hand, his gaze steady yet carrying an intensity that made Clara's heart quicken. He walked to the center of the room, each step measured, as if he did not wish to break the fragile barrier that still separated her from happiness. "Clara," he began, his voice firm yet soft, "I have reached a point where I can no longer keep silent about what I feel." She lifted her eyes, feeling a strange warmth rise to her cheeks. "Sir Henry," she started, hesitant, but he interrupted her. "Do not look at me as a diplomat, nor as a client. I do not see the seamstress of Mayfair, but the woman who occupies my thoughts day and night. You possess something that no wealth, title, or ball can offer: authenticity, courage, and a soul that does not yield to the injustice of the world." Clara felt her breath catch. Each word he spoke seemed like an invisible thread piercing her soul, connecting her to a world that had always seemed distant. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You need not say anything," Henry replied, holding her hands firmly. "Just know that from the very moment I saw you at work, I recognized something rare. I have never sought titles or wealth in those I love. I seek truth, and you possess it." Tears came, silent, streaming down Clara's cheeks. For the first time, she felt seen, acknowledged, and, above all, desired for who she was, not for what she created for others. Henry leaned in slightly, unhurriedly, as one who respects every beat of the woman's heart before him, moving closer still. "Clara Weston, allow me to show you that there is a place for you beyond my salon." And in that instant, among silk threads and the warmth of the fireplace, Clara Weston finally understood that life could reward even the loneliest of hearts. Love, when true, asked for nothing more than the courage to be recognized. Months had passed since that silent confession, and spring once again painted Mayfair in shades of green and pink. Clara's small salon still carried the scent of fabrics and candles, but something had changed. The world felt lighter, and she herself walked with more assured steps. Gradually, her relationship with Henry moved beyond mere glances and restrained gestures. He visited frequently, no longer only for Emily, but to share conversations, laughter, and above all, mutual respect. Clara realized that her position as a seamstress no longer defined who she was in his eyes. Finally, in a discreet yet elegant union, Clara Weston became Lady Ashford. It was not the dress she wore, though it was the most beautiful she had ever sewn, but the recognition of her essence, courage, talent, dignity, and soul. As she entered the salon, now as a guest of honor, all eyes followed her, no longer with disdain or indifference, but with respectful curiosity. Clara lifted her chin and felt her heart beat in a way she had never experienced. Henry approached, his smile gentle and genuine. "I never doubted you, Clara, and now the world cannot either." She smiled in return, feeling each word as if they were stitches in a seam, finally completing the gown of her own life. Clara Weston, the young woman who once dressed others for a life that was not her own, was finally seen, loved, and acknowledged. In that moment, she understood that true redemption did not come from wealth or titles, but from genuine recognition and a love that sees the soul above all else. The narrow salon, the fabrics, the candlelight, all remained, but now as witnesses to her transformation. The seamstress had become a woman, and the woman had found her place in the world she had always dreamed of, not merely as a spectator, but as the protagonist of her own story. And so, among the embroidery and flowers of Mayfair, Clara Weston found what she had always sought, not only beauty in dresses, but beauty in life, in love, and in her very existence.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss what's coming next. Want to see the continuation of this story? Comment below and let us know what you think. Your opinion makes all the difference.